they're designed to be very interactive. So please again, raise your hand if you have questions. We're going to start tonight. Our city engineer, Todd Train, is going to walk you through where the road is going to be, and then some of the principles that he uses when he designs a road. So you can understand the thinking that goes through road design. We have another road expert in the audience, so feel free to add value. Yes, I am. If you have any value add, please go ahead. We'll circulate the sign-up sheet. If you want to sign it, please do. And you can check the box, like I said, to get on Dan's email list or Mike's or Mike, whichever one or the other, or none of them. All right. So with that, we'll turn time over to Todd. And when Todd's done, Dan and Mike will get up and talk about what are the next steps as this thing goes through the legislative process now to get approved. And then feel free to ask them questions. I do have body armor for them if you want to be honest. I'll save that till we see what the temperature is. And Dan and Mike, if when you're up here, please use these mics. It's being recorded. Sorry. But hold the mics close so that they won't just see your pretty face, they'll actually be able to hear what you're saying. Okay, take it away, Tom.
Appreciate it, Rod. Rod asked me to go through a few things just to give you a broad overview of the east-west connector, what we call, you may have heard of it as Murdoch Connector, Canal Boulevard, many names, but it's our east-west connector. I'm just going to show you a map real quick, just a little bit of overview of the need for it, the location of it. I hope you can see my pointer up here, SR92. Sure. We can, wrong ones. There we go. Does that work? Yes. Please feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to answer anything as we go. I'm going to keep this fairly simple, but if you have other questions, let me know. SR92 up here. Down here we have 700 North in American Fork, and then we also have 300 North in American Fork, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. We have a fairly large distance between what we consider a through connection, SR92 and 300. It's about 3.4 miles currently. We don't consider 7th North all the way through because it really doesn't connect here. I know American Fork has a plan to do that in the near future. And then it would cut that distance down to about 2.8 miles. But the need for an east-west connector is obvious, that we don't have any connection between that large span. So the proposal currently is to connect Harvey Boulevard in Cedar Hills to what we call Canal Boulevard in Highland. This alignment that you see there is a conceptual alignment at this point, but it received some MAG fundings several years ago, but the project has been on hold for over 10 years now, trying to work out some right-of-way issues, different things. But this is the current alignment. It would go through the state property, just below Lone Peak, connecting there. We are required to cross the Murdoch Canal Trail right there because they have already planned for us to go over the top of the pipe and created a hardened surface below right above the pipe to protect the pipe. So that is the one location we can cross the trail, and then it drops down and goes just on the north side of Fox Hollow. So that's kind of a broad overview of the alignment of the road. Rod asked me to kind of go over for you guys what we look at when we look at a road design. And some of you may be familiar with this, especially Doug Bassett here, but this is a form that is very common. This is the project design criteria form, and when we design a road, there's many resources that we have, and I brought a couple of them just so you can kind of, this is what we call the Green Book. It's the highway, it's the AASHTO design guidelines. geometric design for roads. This is called the Highway Capacity Manual, and then we have other manuals, but these are the manuals that we use as we go through this project form. Basically, this project form is the very first thing we do is we look at the annual average daily traffic. So there have been several studies over the years. The most recent was a UDOT study, and they determine by doing they put it into a traffic model, and they determine what the average traffic would be on that road on a daily basis throughout the year. And then what they will do from there is they will take that number and classify the road, whether it's an arterial road, a collector road, or a local road. This would be a minor arterial. This is SR 92 is an arterial road. SR 74 would be a minor arterial as well. But roads like 700 North and American Fork, 300 North and American Fork would be considered major collector roads. So this was classified through the study as a major collector road. What that means is once we have a road classification, then we would actually assign lanes to that road. In a situation like this, major collector in Highland City would be a 2 or 3 lane collector road. So using that average daily traffic, we give it a classification, and we also assign how many lanes of traffic would carry, how many lanes would carry that traffic load. Once we have the lane configuration, then we start to look at the design speeds, and we follow this form down. We add the lanes in. Then we start looking at these critical elements of the road. And these are required by the Federal Highways Association. But design speed is basically based on what the classification is. Obviously, if you have a road that is classified as an arterial, the intent is to move traffic. And so that design speed would be assigned to that road, and then you go through all of the design criteria through these manuals to determine, and we'll go through this really quick, but all of these items, the design speed is always as much or more than what the posted speed limit would be. So we're designing a road to be safe for what we would post the speed limit as. But for a collector road, you're usually between 30 and 35 miles per hour for a collector road. Major collectors usually a 35 mile an hour. But then we would go down, and I'm not going to get into detail with all of these things. I don't know if you can read them. I'll read them for you. But lane widths, we put 12 in there because that is the standard width of a lane. When you get into turn lanes, deceleration lanes, acceleration lanes, they can go lower or higher depending on the design criteria. Shoulder width, super elevation, horizontal alignment. But we go right down this list to design the road when it gets to that point. For the east-west connector, we're not to that point yet. Right now, we've got a conceptual alignment. We've got traffic studies that have given us what the average daily traffic is, and once we have right-of-way negotiated, it won't be finalized, but negotiated that the project will go through. Obviously, we will go through that design criteria list and come up with a design of what this road needs to be. Just to give you a little bit of history, Harvey Boulevard in Cedar Hills is a collector road there. It matches very similar to our collector road, Canal Boulevard, as far as asphalt widths and right-of-way. So we have pretty much the same width on one side as we do on the other, and it's the same classification as what the east-west connector has been funded to be. So we really have a good guideline of what this road needs to be. Now, as the project moves forward, depending on elevation, access points, all of these things, it will all go into the design of the road. I don't know if everyone isn't familiar, we have a substantial grade drop right in this area where it drops down into the American Fork River Basin there. So those things will be considered as we look at the design moving forward. But those are some of the things that we look at when we design a road. I could go into a lot more detail, but I just wanted to give you a general overview of what that is. And open it up if you have any questions for me as far as the design, where things are. Anyone have any questions for me? Yes?
What is the plan for going over the river?
So over the river, the plan is to do a bridge. So right here is the American Fork River. It would be similar. Obviously, we haven't designed it, but American Fork just recently did a project, and you can go down and look at it. It crosses right there. This is a bridge that I would suspect it will be something similar to that. I can't give a guarantee, but it would be something similar. So if you drive down, this is the Art Night Park. You can actually just park right there, and it looks really nice. They've obviously done the hydrology to know exactly what goes under the bridge. So. Any other questions? Yes.
Would there be traffic lights on either end of the road?
Yes, great question. With this project, we would construct a signal on SR 74 and North County Boulevard as part of this project. So that was part of the funding. And keep in mind, the funds were allocated, I believe, in 2006. Is that correct, Andrew? 2006. So we're going on 11 years ago, 12 years ago. Depending on how construction prices have changed, we will see how far the money will go. But we are going to do signals, yes.
I also have a question on there's a Murdoch Trail, there's also the Art Night Trail. Is it possible to do an underpass for those?
That is the plan. So the plan right now, and you can see there's lots of trails going every which way. The plan is to run a trail side by side with the road from this point on. The Murdoch Canal Trail comes right here. The plan is to do an underpass similar to what you see on North County Boulevard. And then this trail would actually have to tie in over here to avoid the road. And then the rest of the trails, so this, if you wanted to get from this point over, you would actually have to come up to where the trail goes underneath the road. And then from this point, it would actually wrap around and follow the road over to SR 74.
Awesome.
So that's the plan. Obviously, there's a lot of design issues that we'll run into and to make that happen, but that's the plan. Yes?
Why don't you just do an underpass right there, where the road's going to cross?
Right here?
Over there where the trail is.
Right here?
No, to the left.
This one?
Right there, isn't that a trail there?
Well, that one is the one that goes down to Art Night Park. This is the main trail, and we were hoping to keep that same alignment. So this is the main trail that we would follow.
So that trail is right on top of the precipice and the peak of where that road's going to be torn out. So it wouldn't make sense to leave it there because that's where we're going to cut out.
Well,
But isn't that a north-south trail anyway? I mean, you could put an underpass on the road.
and like I say, this is a conceptual design. Once we get into the actual design of the road, we'll put it where it needs to go. But that's a great point. Anything else? Any other questions? Yes.
So will the trail be on the north side of this connector road, or will it be on the south side?
Still in negotiation.
That can be negotiated?
Yes. So right now, we just know that a road is going through and where the trail ends up. Now, Highland City staff and Highland City representatives have been talking to the homeowners association down there, meeting with them. No decisions have been made at this point.
They haven't talked to us hardly at all. I live right next door to the home that will be torn out to make room for the road. I haven't heard anything from you guys.
So how many times?
So you need to talk with Stephen Babbitt.
Fab.
Bad.
Stephen Babbitt.
He is representing the
Now,
organization.
I understand that, and I talked to him, but
Well, we've
as
had,
far as
In the last, 6 months, we've met with them 3 times. We've gone down
The
to,
homeowners association.
yeah, the homeowners association, and we're hoping that they,
The president.
yeah, we're hoping that they pass the information along to the residents.
And then I talked to him,
Okay.
but I thought you were insinuating that.
No, just the homeowners association, I apologize.
All right.
So we've been meeting with them and trying to resolve issues, but until we get into the design, some of those decisions of where the trail will be, width of the trail, those kind of things, those decisions will be made when the design starts.
This is just my personal preference. I use the trails. I like to work. If the trail can stay on the north side of the connector road, it'll tie in better to the rest of the Murdoch Trail. So the Murdoch Trail goes on for miles, and right here in the middle of Highland, it doesn't connect. And we have to go on the highway, across the Alpine Highway, to deal with all that traffic in order to get to work. And that's really the only dangerous crossing I have. If the connector stays on the north side of, if the trail stays on the north side of the connector, we're finally finishing the Murdoch Trail, so to speak, because it will connect to the other trail on the Alpine Road. If you put the trail on the south side of the road, we'll have to cross that light, and we'll have an intersection that the lights will have to cross.
Yeah.
So there's a really good argument to try to keep it on the north side of the connector.
Okay? Yes?
So it sounds like there's just one house that would be torn out, or how many would be?
So right now Highland City has purchased 2 homes. This home and this home. And right now, it's, the setbacks, once the road is constructed, the road will actually go through this home and is so close to this home that it won't meet any kind of setback requirements that we have here in Highland. But until we have a full design and know exactly where that road is, it's unsure. So, but at this time, we know for sure this one is coming out, and then this one, from the preliminary design, it looks like it would need to come out as well, but
Okay.
that decision will be made in the future. Any other questions for me? Yes?
I'm a resident of Pheasant Hollow, and one of the concerns we have is flood control. Same question about the bridge over the river.
Yes.
You know, if there was anything that went on there that was in any way impede the flood that came down, and all of our homes could get flooded out. So we just are concerned that that's in your planning as well.
Yes, so the we will have a hydrology analysis on the river and make sure that the opening underneath that bridge, the hope is that we wouldn't impact the actual flow line or channel at all and build the bridge over the top. That's what American Fork did down below. But it would sit up high enough that it would adequately take the flows, historic flows.
So
Yes.
once the road is completed, then the department in Highland City would be Highland City's responsibility to maintain, I presume.
Which one?
The portion of the road within Highland City limits.
Yes.
And then, the state, Wetland Center property is state property, would the city be maintaining it through the easement after that?
Those are the negotiations that are currently happening. So currently, all of the road sits in Highland City corporate boundary. So, but currently there's negotiations on what is actually going to happen with this property. So once we know that, and I'm probably not the right person to actually answer that question, but we anticipate that we would own and maintain that road. Maybe not actually have ownership of it, but maintain it. Any other questions? If not, I'll turn the time back over to Rod.
Okay, I'll move on. Yes.
I understand their concern of the closest neighborhood to this road. Why are we not proposing more roads to ease the traffic in Highland from east to west? Down in Highlands Glen, that could connect, where the country club is, that could connect. Why are we not doing that as well?
So
Slow-going roads.
Yeah, with the analysis that we did, we looked at, in fact, the recent traffic study that was done by UDOT, they looked at 3 different connections. A central, which is this one, a northern connection, but they didn't specifically put where it would be, and a southern. The issue that we have, I agree, this is if you look in all of Utah County, you probably won't find a similar situation with as much development as we have and no access points across this area.
And 3 golf courses back to back.
But the issue is we're bound by so many different, not only topographic issues, but also golf courses, the developmental center for one. I mean, it's going to be almost impossible to get a road through there. So over the years, I mean, this is ongoing since 1980, trying to get a road through here. So we're close right now. We would really like to punch one road through to alleviate some of the traffic concerns, but I agree 100%. I mean, this is not just the fix-all. We're going to continue to have traffic issues. So I appreciate that question.
Any other questions?
Ron?
Yes?
I would suggest you give a little bit of background on why this has gone so long. What's really been holding up? I think that's a good lead into why we have our 2 representatives here, or senator and representative here.
I would be happy to do that. Mayor, our current mayor has lived this much longer than me. Would you want to do a little bit of history?
I hope that doesn't reflect on my age. However, there was a considerable amount of development that occurred about the time that Highland incorporated. One of the reasons that Highland incorporated is because there were several who believed that the county was allowing too small of lots. Whether that's good or bad doesn't matter. There was about 13 subdivisions that applied as soon as they heard that Highland was going to incorporate. So they wanted to get into higher density subdivisions before that happened. But that brought in an influx of growth, and it became very important for Highland City and the county to determine where this east-west connection would be made. And several items were at least looked at, and a lot of them have been dropped off the map. And golf courses are difficult to run roads through because they do have activities that take a little bit or are a little more width than just a road for safety issues. And this road will carry not a huge amount of traffic, but it will carry a large volume considering it compared to a residential street. That being said, what has happened here now is we did have development occurred, some of them even prior to the city incorporating, but now you have to try and put a road through that has very little bit left to accommodate that road to happen. The golf course becomes difficult. Highland Glen was a proposed connection. We made arrangements for that. We had several discussions. That had 6F responsibilities associated with it. In other words, the federal government had put money into the Utah State Adventure and Learning Park, which is now our Highland Glen Park, but that means you have to get past the issue now of protected property that is more difficult to develop for a road. After years, I mean, going down the route, going through the park was about a 4-year ordeal in itself, and this road became, in consultation with the county, is the best place to connect to the Harvey position as far as having a road that met the criteria of funding. Based on it involves more communities and solving more of those transportation issues. Now, the developmental center has had plans in place, but not very detailed, but they now have considered that they would like to develop the property just south of Lone Peak into some mixed-use development that may bring considerable amount of revenue for the developmental center to use for the ongoing provisions for the individuals that are there in the facility. So all of those being said, it's been difficult to get across the developmental center property. It has been made more difficult to wait because now you have other development, including the golf course, which Tri-City Golf Course that pre-existed Highland's incorporation as a city. So as we went to this position in 2006, when these were being discussed seriously again, it was that this route made the most sense, and especially the first one to be built. There's not even cut and dry where we get additional roads if we need them. One may still have to go through the park, but it means you're still going to have to deal with the 6F difficulties that exist trying to get ground to be contributed to park use outside of this development. All of that being said, the money has been funded now through MAG for a number of years, as has been indicated, and this is the route that fits the traffic design for lights along the highway, SR 92, feeding on North County, and so Harvey Boulevard is deemed to be the best place for that next light location to be. So this is the spacing of that light configuration, turning element of getting one road onto the other. And so now this is the route that we're suggesting takes place. There's still a little room to be dealt with as design goes on, but it is the route that's been accepted to be funded and to be built.
So, Mayor, about a year and a half ago, helped me put together the history of the road, which I put on my blog. So if you want to know all the details, there've been like 13 different routes that were considered. So there's all the history with links to whatever data exists about that particular event. So I've got years, I've got months and dates. If you want to go through that, you can spend an hour or two on that and just go through the history and kind of see how we got to where we are. And you're welcome to do that. It's freely accessible. Then there's another post that looks at the road study and says, here's what they said, and does some analysis on what the information they provided to us, which is also in my find useful. So those two posts on my blog about the history of the East-West Connector and the road study are there. You still just go to my blog and type in Murdoch Connector, East-West Connector, and you'll get to the right posts and make them to each other at some point in time. Any other questions before we get to Dan and Mike? Yes.
I'd like to hear a little bit about what happened to that diagonal route that went all the way up to high school. And I also want to hear about like the proposed speed limit.
The speed limit will come as a result of this designing the road. And it'll be whatever the road state, their design says is the best speed limit. It's not determined here. Again, according to Todd, between 30 and 35. Don't know yet till we get down to that. The diagonal road was a road proposed by the state when they had a development design, and they put a diagonal road. The main road is being a diagonal dumping out into the high school parking lot. Right there, the red road. And when the state came and presented their development plan to the city council, and they met with us individually, I don't think there was any member of city council or any member of the planning commission that liked that, because there was a concern of dumping all that traffic right into the parking lot and then turning a little bit and being out of line. We just thought that was a big safety issue. But that was the state's plan. It's their land. Because they own the land, we have limited ability to influence what goes on inside there. But they just went through and reorganized their thinking on that. Bill Exeter is the current project manager, and he's new to the program. He wasn't there then. And then they said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do something else. So they're working on putting the boxes in different places from where that plan was. So you can look at that plan. There's a link to the plan. The components of the plan are part of the future plan. They just won't be exactly where they were in this plan. It will more likely be commercial along North County Boulevard, go in a little bit, then you have the 630 park and then past that you have single-family homes, and there's still a debate as to how much of the property is going to be state-owned and leased versus sold to the developer. That's an ongoing discussion. At least relative to the single-family homes. I think the rest will stay state-owned. But that's their call. You can interact with them, right? I give you contact information, and we have our two representatives right here who have the biggest influence on that. And with that, I will give a mic to Mike, and give a mic to Dan. And it's the Dan and Mike show.
Michael, take the mic, that's funny. Welcome, I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm your representative since 2012, and it's a pleasure to serve. These are outstanding individuals, and I just first say thanks to Rod for setting up this meeting and being a collaborator, and on some level, a peacemaker. A peacemaker is blessed on multiple levels, and Rod has really made a significant effort over years to reach out to varying parties, and this meeting is just a symbolic representation of that outreach, and I appreciate you being here so that we could transact and interact. So in 2012, when I was first elected, I had no idea that this was an issue, and in fact, like many of us, we drive by that big piece of land and think, everything's growing around there, what's the status of that land? And as I became a representative around 2013, somebody, I don't know who the first one that brought me into this and engaged me on this process, showed me what a wasp's nest full of possible troubles this issue is. And the reason why is I would have thought as a professional in my area that a road's just a road. How hard can a road be, right? It just gets some asphalt or concrete and put it down. Well, when you involve several cities and also a neighborhood and the destruction of 2 homes in that neighborhood, it becomes a generational issue. And my friends in Pheasant Hollow that are here tonight and those that aren't here, that's a big issue. And of course, they talk about your interest in the road is proportional to your distance from the proposed road. It's easy to say when you live far away from the proposed road to say, yeah, just put the thing in because I need it so I can get to the golf course. But if those are your houses destroyed in your neighborhood, and subsequently now you've got teenage kids going to Lone Peak High School and driving at the rates they might drive in the ways that 17-year-olds might drive, that might be an issue for all of us to have that go through your neighborhood. So that issue alone is one that I think resonates for all of us. And I'll get to questions in just a minute, but so over the past 4 years, I've been integrated in this process, and it's not been easy. And I'll tell anybody that has concerns or complaints about how it's going, okay, join the fray, and let's all kind of have a scrum about what to do with this, because it's not easy. There are multiple parties, and we should listen to each other and try to work through this. The width of the road and the speed limits and where does the road go, I see a lot of flexibility, and there's a lot of opportunities for us to work together so nobody is getting rammed through and punched through, and I heard that term earlier, punched through, and I thought, yeah, punched right in the face through as to how the road can go. Well, we need to be sensitive to the fact that these are people's neighborhoods and their opportunity in their domestic domiciles to have peace in those areas that are being infringed upon. In addition, you've got the developmental center, which this is a generational decision for them. When you lay down a road, you put a stake in the sand, and this is what that development is going to be built around that. So I take all that seriously, even though I had no idea when I started. A road's just a road. It's not going to be that hard. Well, it hasn't been that hard. But I've been impressed with the people, and that's one pleasurable aspect of what I do is how decent the people are. We disagree on multiple levels on multiple policies, but people can come together without swearing at each other and doing other unpleasant things to try to work things out so that the greater good is accomplished, and I've been impressed with that. So with that, I want Senator Hemmert to have his chance to give us my friend in the back who raised your hand. Did you want to ask your question now before I?
There's more than one neighborhood.
Which other
That's
neighborhood?
being affected. Well, my neighborhood is right by Lone Peak High School.
Okay.
Everybody who doesn't want a road going by their home or their park is throwing their teenage children accidents every day on the boulevard.
Thank you. Meaning, in building the road, we can potentially create safety for other areas and enhance the livability for other people. Is that what you're saying, right?
There's more of us that need more roads.
Absolutely. So we're all in this together, right? This is a community, and we all try to work these things out. And yeah, I respect that aspect as well. Thank you, Senator. If you chime in on
Yeah, no, thank you. So, is this mic on? Okay. So I'm new to running for public office. I ran last 2 years ago, and I will say this road was the second most frequently mentioned item that came up in talking to first delegates, and second, just general voters in general. Before the session last year, I did this little survey. Some of you may have responded to that, but the road was obviously very important to people who live in this area. I live a little further south, and when I first heard about this road, I was like, how hard can that be? It's just a road. But it became evident pretty quickly that it is more than a road. You have many parties who have an interest in this. You have the homeowners, both on either side of the road. You have the state who owns the land, and the land, if you recall, is set aside for the developmental center. And so anything we do needs to take the developmental center into account. And by the developmental center, I want to emphasize the residents. These are individuals who, I was in a meeting with Bill and Guy Thompson, who is the director of the developmental center, not long ago, and he made a comment that has stuck with me. And that's, I'm concerned about the road because I have residents who want to escape, if I can use that word, and jump in front of cars on busy roads. And so, whatever we do with this road, speed and everything else, we have to remember that there's individuals who live there who maybe aren't as functioning as some others. And that just needs to be a consideration that's kept in mind. That said, I wanted to take a minute just to talk about where we are in the process and what we do in the process. So the developmental center has, as was referenced earlier, has had a development plan. What they've learned, and that plan had to be approved by the legislature or authorized by the legislature. I don't know what exactly the right word there is. But in either case, that plan was approved, but what they found as they were getting developers making proposals and coming in to develop that land was that it was hard for a developer to make it work with the size of development that was available. And so what the developmental center has requested through its board is let's go out and request a bigger developmental plan. And that is a bill that Mike and I are running. We'll probably start it in the Senate, then it'll go over to the House. And that bill will just be, it'll do a couple things. One is it will approve a new request for proposal process and a new development for the land in general. But one of our goals in conjunction with this is to make sure that the road, wherever it ends up, whatever the speed limit is, whatever other dynamics are associated with this road, there's a funding issue that's a big piece to it. It has to meet certain criteria to get the funding from MAG. It can't be too small, too slow, or MAG can't fund it. And all those dynamics need to be worked out. But our goal is that the state, at least, is no longer the logjam. That, and I don't know what the details are relative to whether, I don't think we have any plans to dictate what the road is, but at the same time, we want to have approved it or approved the process in a manner that no one can say we need the state to approve this road anymore. That's our goal, is to get it out of the state's hands, and to say it this way, let the decision-making power occur down here. So we're not up in Salt Lake at the legislature, gumming things up. That's the goal. That's the goal of this legislation, and I think that's all I have to say. Any questions? Yes.
Assuming everything goes according to plan, everything, when's the soonest we could possibly have the road, and what's a realistic expectation timeline?
I'm going to throw that question out to someone who I think is going to be a better expert, either this gentleman or even Andrew.
Well, as far as we're concerned, the money's available. We're ready to put together an RFP today if we had the ability to move forward. So legislation is spring.
So the legislative session starts last week of January and goes to the first week of March. When this passes is unknown. It'll have an effective date probably later. I guess with resolutions it could be a little bit different, but typically it's June. Regardless though, when it passes and how it passes through legislature is a little bit of an unknown, but it would occur in that window, the yes on the legislation.
So if that were the case, we would hope to start a design once we know that's going to happen. A design process would usually take anywhere from 3 to 6 months and then start construction. I wouldn't anticipate that we would have an open road until probably the spring of 2019. That would be the soonest that we probably would have a road open if we would get approvals.
So the other piece in that is, we don't have, even if we can go through the state, we don't have all the land that we need. So Pheasant Hollow has some property that we would have to have a portion of to be able to move this through. So there's still that negotiation on top of the state. And we have it most of the way through the Highlands, Pheasant Hollow area, but not all the way. We don't have any of it through developmental center. So that has to be in parallel with this.
So are there positive negotiations going on?
That's the discussions that we've been talking about. So they've been engaged with us. We're now laying out the road so they can see where it is, they can see the impact to them, and what we're talking about the options and their costs, things like that.
I just say on that level, thank you, Brian. Councilmember Braithwaite has been working with the Pheasant Hollow individuals, and I did hear something earlier suggesting that maybe not all of the neighbors are aware of. Well, okay, there's a lot of people that need to be made aware of these things, but thank you for your work to try to be an emissary of figuring these sort of things out. Even now, there's still a lot of things that need to be sorted out. What I'd offer to this group is to make sure that you understand our roles in this. We're two attorneys. You do not want us to design a road because it might, like any sort of legal attorney opinion, go all over the place and not ever do anything functional. Like most attorneys' product,
It would be pretty awesome.
functional. So,
It would be pretty awesome.
yeah, right. So our intent is not to dictate to the locals. Local control is really important to both of us, and we want this community to decide the nature of any road that is determined. But we do feel strongly that it's high time after 40 years, that's kind of amazing. After 40 years that the state get out of the business of telling the individuals in this area what the nature of that road would be. Auditor Dougal?
I was just going to mention for history, about 10 years ago, when the county wanted to expand North County Boulevard, the legislature passed a resolution taking some of that developmental center property, selling it to the county so they could expand the road. So if you want an example of that kind of resolution, you can look back then. Representative Craig Frank was the House sponsor of that bill. And it was about 10 years ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of history in this room on multiple levels.
So Mike, Ruth King had a question a while ago. Does he still have it?
I was just going to say, along with the comment before, I'm living over in Panorama Drive area. So the history is Yukos Inoue was my backdoor neighbor and talked about, this plan in the master plan since he was county commissioner, 40, 50 years ago, and that there were 3 or 4 of them through. But my concern is that my neighborhood had 28 homes bulldozed and taken out for $4,800. And so I'm very anxious. I teach at Cedar Ridge Elementary, and I think every day, what if there is an emergency at Lone Peak High School? Because the kids that are coming to high school every morning, if they're late and behind traffic, they come around through the Stake Center and around my neighborhood to make a left-hand turn onto 4800. And of course, my neighbors on the other side of 4800 can't get out. So I guess my question would be, I'm very anxious to see it finally happen. I think it would be a safety issue mainly. But when you're talking about speed limits, if that is a connector or a collector, and if 4800 is designated as a collector, could we not reduce the speed on 4800 to the same speed that's on Harvey Boulevard and the other? And the reason for that is, or else put a weighted light on Country Club Drive, because literally Country Club Drive on the east, all of that neighborhood, and the ones on the west of 4800 literally have no way of exiting if they're making a left-hand turn anytime. But if they had a weighted light that they could go on Country Club Drive, then they could both get out safely. That's their only egress. So that's an idea.
Thanks. I hope our city engineer is taking notes. And as to the feasibility of that, you're talking the wrong fellow, but who knows? I appreciate the great idea. Yes? Go ahead.
So a question, there's been some talk that the developmental center property might be recommended to go into American Fork City versus
Yes,
So one, what do you guys favor? How do you see that? How do you vote? And is that a state legislation decision that the legislators, who's going to make that decision? Which city it would sit in, and how do you guys favor it?
That's going to be negotiated between the cities, and we're not going to, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not going to
get around all that. The cities are going to have to sort that out. The legislature does not, as far as an auditor do, you can correct that if I'm wrong, but
I think
we
the
can put
decision
that
on
in the
that,
resolution. But
I don't think that's a legislative decision. I think that ultimately comes to the governor.
the governor would determine where that
If they
is
want
state
to
property.
If they want to annex one way or the other, I think from a state.
The authority in that would be the county. Utah County would make the decision based on that. If it goes past the county and is appealed, then the courts would make the decision. The state would have their involvement because it is still a state facility as far as that portion of it. But right now, there's no utilities in that ground specifically by either city. And so a lot of this will be left to the owner of the property in their request.
Right. But when it comes to that owner is the state. I'm just saying it's not a legislative decision. It ultimately would be an executive branch, governor type of thing. And the reason the developmental center wants to, in theory, annex into American Fork is they believe only working with one city will be easier for them rather than working with two cities.
And while,
is what I've been told.
No, yeah, and while I think we're going to try to stay out of that, that makes sense to me. If I'm, I'm not, but if I was the developmental center, it might be easier to work with one city rather than two cities.
Thanks. It's a great point. Please.
I just wanted to, I've studied this issue quite a bit. State law says that the city boundary is determined, the landlord is the only one that can propose to change the city boundary. The city that's annexing would have to approve it. So it's up to the state to decide if they want to change that boundary. American Fork would have to agree to take it over. I don't know if it would be legislative or not, but it's the state that decides if that boundary changes.
And still, as you point out, it's going to be negotiated between the two cities, and it's going to be, we're going to let the developmental center figure out, and the cities figure out who gets it, where it goes, and as far as the legislature is concerned, as far as we're concerned, our intent is to stay out of that. And I don't know that we need to be in it, so.
Well, the interesting challenge here is this is different than any other property owner because the cities are a creation of the state. Therefore, ultimately, they have to do whatever the state dictates. This is part of the weirdness of this whole situation.
Thanks. Unless there's more questions, the politicians will sit down and let the smart people take. I'm just kidding. Let the rest of the people take over. Did you have a question for us?
I do. Who can tell me how to change the name of North County Boulevard into something like Lone Peak Parkway? North County Boulevard is
I think John Doolittle Memorial Parkway sounds like better.
I'm not dead.
It is a state road.
I don't know how we change the names. Hopefully not through
Well, the
this.
state road means it's SR whatever.
Yeah. SR 129 would be what we'd like to refer to that as.
There you go.
Andrew, how do you change those names?
I thought it was actually still called Lone Peak whatever up on the Highland area, but it's got multiple names historically.
You have
Yeah, so it's just like 800 North is, I think, Canyon Parkway, oh, sorry.
This is Andrew Jackson from Mountain Association of Governments.
I am Andrew Jackson. Yeah, so like 800 North became Canyon Parkway in Orem, or maybe you remember 13 South, 12 South in Orem became University Parkway. They're state roads, so the state has a naming system. You can put a request to modify that.
Is that from UDOT?
I believe so. I don't know. Doug, do you?
It would take the cities that will pass this group to also pass a resolution agreeing to that name change. The coordinate system and the state route number doesn't change. The coordinate system would be secondary, so people that rely on coordinate system to know where they're going, it could be part of the name.
Yeah, and the issue that we had, I think it had like 3 or 4 different coordinates based on which community it was in at that time. So it was, you know, it could be in one city and then just a little bit further in another city that has different coordinates. So that's why we chose the name.
The other issue with that is it goes through American Fork and Pleasant Grove, so calling it Lone Peak Boulevard, they might not be too happy about that in American Fork and Pleasant Grove, so.
Any other questions for the legislators? Dan is trying to volunteer Bill. He's the project manager of the development process for the land itself. And I think we just coerced him. Sorry about that, Bill. I was really trying hard. He was trying to not notice that. He's been on the development center board a couple of years ago, was made the development director, development manager, project manager for the land between the high school and the development center. And he's been involved in like shifting, getting rid of the diagonal road. He can just update us on where his thinking is. Of course, everything's subject to change until something's built.
I was really hoping to stay anonymous for a long, long time. So be that. Okay. Basically, a lot of the things that are on people's mind have been covered as best as they can be covered. Regarding the Murdoch connector, we're no longer in the way. As both Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Hemmert said, the state is no longer standing by. The developmental center is not opposed to the road at this point. In fact, we're full speed ahead and doing what we can. I think the design of the road is going to be determined once we have selected a development company. They will also be included in the design not only of the property, but how the road works as it goes through the neighborhood. We'll also work in conjunction with the cities that are affected by this and all the local governments to get their input as we did with the master plan. Let's see, what else do you want to talk about? We've changed our perspective on the design. It's going to look much different. As Rod was mentioning, the components are all going to be the same, but the layout is going to be much better and much more functional. It didn't take very long. When I was on the board, I kind of loved this design because the diagonal road took all the traffic up and away from the developmental center, which is what our major concern was, is our very first priority in this entire project is the welfare and the future of the individuals, which I think sometimes gets lost in the discussion, whether it's about the road or the property or annexation or whatever that might be. All of the decisions that the developmental center is making is being driven by the welfare of the individuals that reside there. That's the most important thing. These are people with intellectual and some physical disabilities that cannot take care of themselves, and that's what we're here to do, is to take care of them. We had a resident pass away just last week, and her funeral was last Thursday. She'd been there for 53 years. It's her entire life. And there are 200 individuals just like her. So let's not lose any of the perspective about why this is happening, because they're the reason that we're doing this. To help create additional revenues coming in addition to our existing budget. They're going to help increase services and facilities for the individuals. Okay, that's our main goal and purpose behind this whole thing. So if we keep that in mind first and foremost, it changes the dynamic of all the discussions. Okay, so back to the design. The components will all be the same. The diagonal road, I'll say it was stupid. It just was ugly, and I didn't realize until I started coming to work here. I was on the board for 4 years. They asked me to step off the board and take this position as project manager. So I left my lucrative career in commercial banking and did it. Yeah, it really wasn't lucrative. Once I took over the project, I looked at that design, and the first time I got stuck at that light by the high school, I realized that that was just idiotic. So we changed it, and we're going to utilize professionals that do this for a living, those being the development groups that are going to redesign this for us to make it more functional, much prettier, and a lot better for everybody involved. So there's that update. Annexation, I don't feel like this is the appropriate time or meeting to have that conversation because officially nothing's been said or done. There's just been some conversations, but that's all I have to say about that. With having said those things, any questions from me regarding any of the topics that I've covered or anyone else has covered?
You might want to explain what that, when you're talking about this property, you might want to explain what this is more or less the down.
Ryan, can you speak up?
We had him talk to
Although, just give a little history to me and
you
more.
can help them understand, lost property before, if this is a revenue kind of generating thing for those people. You were explaining, trying to keep it for them.
Right.
They can understand what that means, how it ties into this.
Okay, let me give you a little history lesson.
Do you want to just explain what you just said?
Right. Yeah, and then, okay. He's asked me to explain a little bit about why we're doing this, in addition to the individuals, the idea behind it, and some of the challenges we've had with land in the past. Short history lesson, 1929, then Governor Dern, a couple of representatives whose names I can't recall, and the General Lee Society president of the LDS Church got together and decided that they needed to have a place or facility for those that are intellectually disabled, because the state hospital wasn't equipped to handle intellectually disabled individuals. So they started out with 37 different sites around the state, and they selected this one. So at the time, it was far and away from everybody, but yet close enough to Salt Lake or other major cities that if they needed the support or help, it was available. So out of 37 sites, they picked this one, and for various other reasons. The developmental center property used to encompass all of Lone Peak High School. There we go. Fox Hollow Golf Course, Highland Glen, Alpine Country Club, portions of the Alpine Country Club. It used to go all the way down, the individuals call it the jungle, which if you go down to, I think it's 700 south and over, there's that park with the softball fields across from school. There's that wooded area in there. All used to be part of the developmental center. And over the years, it's kind of been plucked and picked and pulled apart and sold off at way undervalued. And as a board, we decided that this needed to stop. And we had, this 300 plus acres that we were actually very concerned that there were people in the legislature that might want to and pick that property and get rid of it, sell it off and put the money into the general fund. We decided that we would do our best to show them that we had plans for that property. So we created the master plan. We took that, showed the legislature, and said, hey, look, we have this really cool plan to do with some of this acreage, and then this land south we will reserve for developmental center growth. And so we came up with a master plan, which has brought us to where we are today. So we did it to keep the land from being pilfered, and also to create, as I mentioned, additional revenues coming in. A lot of this land will be kept as either a land lease or maybe a joint venture with the developmental center. We're trying to follow the Sitla plan or model on their developments, and they do a lot of joint ventures. So we're creating this trickle-in effect of money to come in to help the developmental center. Mr. Dugal, you have your hand up.
Little nuance to what you said. Actually, back when Senator Dayton was relatively new in the legislature, there was a sweetheart deal between the golf course there. It's now Fox Hollow. They were leasing property. They bought it for a sweetheart deal. That caused Representative Dayton at the time to put restrictions on that land. And so that was part of the dynamic. Where the master plan came from was when I was working on trying to get an east-west road through, they said, we have plans. It's like, you don't have any plan. So the master plan came as a result of that. When we were widening North County Boulevard, they said, well, we have plans. It's like, well, you got to go figure out what your plan is because you have no plan at this point. So just
Now we have a plan. Yes, sir.
So as we talk about your master plan, I hear you'd like to have a retail component, which would kind of be a ground lease with improvements on top of it. There's an apartment component. Would the state keep ownership of the apartments, or would that be a joint venture? I mean, what's the kind of master plan and what's the thought right now?
Well, as far as how it will work out, whether it's a leasehold or a joint venture, will be negotiated with the developer, okay, which we have not yet selected because, as Senator Hemmert was explaining, the original master plan was designed to go out in 4 phases, and each phase was going to require an RFP, and which could leave us with 4 different developers, which would make kind of an ad hoc, interesting looking development. With feedback from development companies and our own experience through this, we decided better to do 1 RFP, 1 master developer. That way I'm only managing 1 master developer instead of 4. It makes my job easier. And that's the resolution that they're looking to get passed in the next session. Once that goes out, we'll immediately release the RFP. We'll have feedback. I've been meeting with a number of developers, both from in-state and out-of-state, that want in on this deal, and so there's a very competitive atmosphere among them to get us the best deal, to make it work the best for us and for them. I mean, everybody's going to win out of this. I don't know that I answered your question, but I gave you a lot of double talk. Anyone else? Yes.
Once the land's developed, it's going to require services. It's going to require things, snow maintenance, road maintenance. They're going to put pressure on our parks, our fields, and things like that. If the state stays the property owner, will there be property taxes to help offset the city's expenses that have to cover for the new development?
It's a great question. And a lot of how that's going to work out will depend on what land is sold and what land is held by the state. Our goal is to hold as much as we can, so we maintain ownership of it. If it's state-owned land, it's my understanding that there's no sale tax applied or local taxes applied to state-owned land. But anything from retail and commercial or restaurants, there's sales taxes shared with whatever city, but no property tax.
Can I ask a follow-up? So when you ask about doing a leasehold improvement, or like a ground lease, there's an improvement on top of the ground. Would there not be property tax or something from the improvement on the ground versus, I understand there's ground property tax, but would that improvement be taxed also?
My understanding that it wouldn't, but you could do a fee in lieu of taxes or something like that. But I'm not a tax guy.
My understanding is it partly comes down to who owns it. So if the state owns it and they're leasing it, then no property tax. But if somebody else is leasing the property and builds and they own it, then that's where there's the property tax. Now, just to reiterate what you said, the reason behind, and I'm one of the guys that's, we should just sell off the property because I come from the perspective of get the state out of the excess land business. But where the fear comes from on some people's part is we don't trust if we sell it that the legislature won't use it for whatever purpose. They don't trust that the legislature will put it in an endowment for future use of the developmental center. And so the thought on the part of some, and I'll say Senator Dayton, is that if the state leases it, then the legislature can't just sweep all the money for whatever purpose it wants. It's a year-to-year cash flow kind of dynamic.
Thank you for clearing that. Let me just say that Senator Dayton, along with some other help, has created a fund, a specific, I call it a trust fund, that these monies, the revenues from this will go into this trust fund. And the majority of those funds will be set aside for use at the developmental center with another portion of them going out to other individuals throughout the state that subscribe to DSPD for additional services. So the majority of the money will stay right there at the developmental center, but then another portion of it will go out to help other people with intellectual disabilities throughout the state. But it's in this specific trust that is, what I understand, takes a supermajority to draw any money out.
One other dynamic, when they mentioned the SITLA model, there are school institutional trust lands throughout the state. When the state was created, there were little chunks of land scattered geographically throughout. And SITLA's job is to manage those. They sell some, they lease some, develop some, and that money goes into a trust fund for the schools. So every year, a certain amount of earnings get kicked into the schools, and actually last election in November, you guys voted on a constitutional amendment to alter the formula for the disbursement of those funds to the schools. But when he talks about SITLA, that's the SITLA model he's talking about.
And SITLA does this very, very well. They have this, I told them they have it down to science. They corrected me and said they have it down to art form. So SITLA does very good, and we're really trying hard to model this process after how they've done things.
There's a question which someone asked, why don't you just have SITLA manage it for you?
You know, I tongue-in-cheek asked them, they said no, in a more colorful, creative way. But they let us know that they're not interested in that. Yes, sir.
I just feel like there's a gap in state law for having to deal with this kind of issue. I don't think the exemption on property taxes was meant. I mean, the DC shouldn't have to pay taxes, and I understand that. And they're not putting a burden on American Fork or wherever they are for parks and police and other services.
Actually, they are.
Actually, American Fork will tell you that we are, and we are. So
Are they compensated for that?
No.
Okay. So my concern, I guess, is just for the state to do a large development like this and have a revenue stream for it, but not have the residents that are living there carrying that load like the rest of us do. You know, it begs the question, if the development goes in as planned, how much will our taxes go up to provide the services that aren't being paid because of state land?
I can't answer that.
Okay.
I don't know.
I feel your man, I can give you a referencing code that deals with that dynamic.
I just wanted to end by saying one thing, and I don't have that either. But what I wanted to say was, I want to point out something that Bill said at the beginning, and also, I guess, say this. And there have been times, I think, when Senator Dayton hasn't been well appreciated in her efforts to protect the developmental center. In the beginning, Bill talked about the interest of the developmental center of the residents, and I do want to say, you know, and actually applaud Senator Dayton for she has carried that torch, that same torch, as far as having a concern for and care of these individuals. The last thing I was going to say, I don't know if that bell means shut up or not, but the last thing I'll say is I do want to make a request. If you are in support of a road, it is helpful for you to reach out to Representative Kennedy. Let us know. I know you're here because you are, but it's helpful for us to see it. Tangible reach out. Hey, I want this to happen. In addition, I think it's helpful for you to reach out to Bill, Guy Thompson, the director, and I'm saying do it nicely. Don't be mean. No one wants mean email. I just delete them. But be nice about it. But also the other developmental center board members. Let them know that you, as a resident, as a local, as someone who lives here, feel a need for or wants this road. It's helpful for you to engage at that level, and it's helpful for us, and it makes it. I think it makes it easier to move it forward. So that's it.
Anything else for me? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Dan and Mike. Since this came up, I'll just weigh in. I fall in John Douglas' camp that I think the state we would all be better served by selling the land, putting it in that trust fund. there's a debate on that. It's a worthy debate. Aside from the lack of property tax, from a city perspective, when the state owns the land, the state can do what, they don't have to adhere to city codes with respect to development. It's their land, they can do what they want with it. The state is the state created cities, so when the state owns the land, it owns the land and can do with it what it pleases. Now they've been good about interacting with us, so I'm not painting them negatively, but my personal view is I think we better serve selling and putting it in the trust fund that Margaret created that has some firewalls around it. But that's not my time. Yes, John.
So for those that care, if you go to the Utah State Constitution, Article 13, Section 3, this is property tax exemptions. The very first one out of the chute. The following are exempt from property tax. Property owned by the state. So when it comes to that question of property tax,
That's the law we live on.
It's not just statutory, that's in the Constitution.
So you'd have to change, it's a big change, yes.
So what is, help us maybe understand, maybe tell us, what is really getting proposed at the state legislature site? I mean, are they going to try to get the road through? Are they going to try to approve the master plan? I mean, what's going in February to try to get through?
So, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to run legislation that has two components. One component of the legislation is that they will authorize the development center to issue an RFP to develop all the land north and a little bit south. I think it's a little bit south of where that connector is going to be. And they'll do an RFP. It's north of the canal, right?
Yes.
So, and then.
It covers both sides of the road.
Right, well, so a little bit south of the road to the canal.
There's the southbound.
Everything north of that canal.
So that's what they're going to authorize to be developed. Now, I don't know what the constraints on that are. If once the RFPs are generated, the proposal comes back, if the state still has to do another resolution to approve the final decision, I think if you want to influence things, let Dan and Mike know how you feel about that. The second component would be the road, and I don't know if they're going to be separate pieces of legislation or one piece with two components, all in one. So if you have an opinion on that, let Mike and Dan know. I talk to them frequently, and they know what I think, but they have a lot of other constituents. I'm not a monopoly. But they are very, both of them, I really, really think we have great representation. I want to let you know that. They listen, they respond, and I just don't think we have better representatives. So thank you for your service. I really appreciate you coming. If you have any other questions, feel free to interact with them directly. On my blog post that talks about the road study analysis, I have the contact, phone numbers and emails for all the relevant parties, including theirs, and the Development Center Board, Townsend's number, and Bill's email and number as well. And they are all responsive people. Bill is very responsive. I asked to go out to lunch with them. He came. That's going out to lunch with me is not the highlight of anybody's day, but he did it anyway, and I thank him for that.
Guy lives in American Fork.
Yep.
So he lives in the community as well.
So, and I know Cedar Hills residents and AF residents and PG residents were all impacted by this. It's not just Highland. So it's just not a Highland issue specifically. It's the area. So do homework. Share information with our representatives. Don't be mean. Mean emails don't get read very well. The first thing that comes out.
They don't convince you to change.
I hate you all of a sudden. You just created a barrier. So just be nice. We can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's a lesson that Mike has learned very well. Dan's learned very well. Brian's constantly at it. Mayor's good at it. We won't. Todd is very responsible. So the people that talked here, feel free to interact with any of them. Yes.
Can I give just one opinion from my perspective? I
Yes.
hear some people say, we're trying to rush this project along. And I would suggest there has been lots of deliberation, lots of patience, and lots of time. I could have seen when people were saying I was trying to rush in 2006, but
Yeah, it's fermenting. Yes, this has gone on a long time, and yes,
I have heard Scott Smith say, last time he ran for city council, this is a quote, "I personally blocked that road," close quote. Is there anyone, including him, that could ever block this road again? Or are we guaranteed that we're going to get some good plan on this road?
it has to get approved by the legislature.
so the next gate is the legislature, and once that's approved, I don't think it's blockable. There can be some delay with negotiations with the state on where, but the state's real friendly. The idea bill is 100% behind it. We're talking with Pheasant Hollow. We're working that through. I don't think any single member of, or even multiple members of city council could block the road again if they could. I don't think we could vote 3-2 to get rid of this road. So. There are, if people want to delay it, it's possible. Like if the state wanted to put some roadblocks in, they could, but once these guys pass it, I think we're on a nice trajectory to get it done. And I think Todd is reasonable in setting that expectation that, I don't think we could plan and have the road built and start in the spring and have it done by the end of next year. And I know, like when you go out to bid a road, if you bid the road in June to be built in August, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So you're better off bidding early and planning for the next year. Yes, yes.
Rod, how much is estimated that Highland will need to kick in?
For the road? Right now, it's a NAG-funded road. Now, where Highland is impacted would be where the development is built, and we went through this with the 215 utility study that we did. If we have to put sewer and water in to service that development that Bill was talking about, the water, putting in the water will cost $1.9 million. That is all what is called impact fee eligible because it's new infrastructure. It was created to service specifically that community. So the developer that develops it is responsible for paying the impact fees up front to pay for that infrastructure. When we put the sewer in, because the sewer is going to link to some existing line, our cost is going to be $2.8 million, but only $1.9 million is going to be impact fee eligible. So that means the sewer that goes in is going to leverage some existing stuff. We're going to have to upgrade the pump station, and we're going to have to put new sewer line in. But the sewer fund is going to have to eat $900,000 worth of costs. Now, we budgeted for that in our planning of the rates for the sewer. So if we didn't have to do that, that would be money that we wouldn't need to spend, and we could refund the residents for the rate reduction. But this is, we're going to have to eat that. Now, what happens after with property tax, etc.? We can negotiate with the state, and this is where Mike and Dan come in again for a fee in lieu of taxes, so that the state would pay us a fee every year that would match what the property tax would have been, because we are going to have to service the area with police and fire, and it will have a significant impact, especially if the high-density apartments come in. That's putting a lot of people. That puts up, when we divide up the public safety costs, we do it based on population and residents, but that would overweight Highland, and we would pick up a much bigger percentage of the Lone Peak Fire Safety District costs. So it will impact us, depending on what the developer will do. Right? Sure. Let's hear it. Here's Mike.
Ron said that there's probably no one that can stop this, but it's been delayed now for, I've been on the council 10 years. I've been pushing for this the whole time. And as you heard from the mayor, it's been going on long before I ever even came to the city. But it could be delayed another 10 years. And the thing that our Representative Senator stated was, please let them know. The urgency is let them know. Get your friends, get your neighbors to let them know what your feelings are. And having that information, they can then share it with their colleagues, and we can have much more urgency in getting this done sooner than later. So I'm in agreement that it's probably impossible to stop this road, but it could be delayed 10, 20 years based upon things that can happen. And some of them may be legitimate efforts to make sure that things are done. Some of them may be just obstructionist kind of moves that people like to do. So I would ask you, please communicate to them. And it's not just letting them know. You've heard that they're in favor of trying to make sure this happens. That's why they're sponsoring the bill. But it gives them an ability to communicate that out with others, saying, here's the sentiment of the community. And so please make those communications, because that's really valuable, and get your neighbors to do it as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, other comments? Andrew. And again, this is Andrew Jackson. He's the executive director of the Mountain Area Land Government Association.
Mountain Land Association of Governments. So we're the ones who program the funding. It's your third quarter sales tax dollars that go in to fund this road. I taught a class at BYU for 20 years. I teach citizenship in the nation, merit badge. There's a show, you should be able to find it on YouTube, called The World That Moses Built. And it's about Robert Moses, who was the public works director in New York City when they did a bunch of the Triborough Bridge, etc. So if you wonder why these projects take so long, if you watch that documentary, it's American Experience, it's PBS done, The World That Moses Built, Robert Moses, it will get you an understanding of how things used to be done in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and why today, because of changes in the 60s, why these things take so long. And I use an example of 800 North at Orem. When we first did the modeling on 800 North, that it needed to be widened, to the date when we had the ribbon cutting on the completion, it was 16 years. So somebody who was born when we first decided that it needed to be widened, they had their driver's license before it was completed. And that's an existing corridor that's been there for a long, long time, but we still had to go through a lot of things. We had to avoid the churches that are on there, we had to work with property owners, etc. And so it's, when government works fast, I think it's bad. When it works slow, it's not great, but it's better. So if you just watch that documentary, that'll help you understand some of the things, why things take as long as they do.
Thank you, Andrew. And I agree. It is frustrating sometimes that we work slow, but that also means we have an opportunity to prevent mistakes from happening. If we work really fast, everything got done really fast, we could do something wrong, and then the things that the city does are very long lasting sometimes. And anybody in government, we are not perfect. And we don't know everything. Just because the guy got elected, his IQ didn't jump 20 points. Probably dropped 20 points. Yes, Helen, sorry.
One thing I'd like to mention is please think about far enough ahead that it doesn't have to be redone in 5 years.
Yes, so the last thing we would want to do is build a long road and then have to review it in 5 years. That's a good point. Now, Mayor, we're over time, sorry. I try to end usually 30, but sometimes we're going to have to keep longer. Mayor Thompson wanted to say a few words, and when he's done, we'll be over. I'll hang around, and these guys may or may not, but feel free to interact with us. In here, we have Dennis Laverne, he's also on the City Council. Brian Braithwaite on the City Council. Rob Shelton is on American Folk City Council. State Auditor John Eagle is here. We've got a high-powered group of people. We've got another council. Sheldon Wimmers from Everett Alpine. Jenny?
Yes.
Okay. Jenny is a current council member running for mayor. And then behind her is another candidate for mayor in Cedar Hills. City Council, sorry. So mayoral candidate, current city council member, city council hopeful. And you're going to wonder why you paid money to have this job that doesn't pay a lot. But you know what? It is fun interacting with people. I generally enjoy it. So with that, I'll let Mayor Thompson close. We also have Nathan Crane over here, who's our city manager, Todd Trainer, city engineer. So lots of people to talk to.
I told Rob that I only needed 3 minutes, so I'll try and keep it below 30. In reality, Guy Thompson is my cousin, and so the developmental center has kind of come home for both of us because that property has served the needs for a number of years, but a huge amount of money came into it when Geneva Steel was built, and so there was money that was pushed that way to accommodate some of the growth that occurred during the 30s and 40s, and so I guess we have to be grateful for that. In respect to that, because they tried to run it as a farm and use some of the clients that were there to do that work, my grandfather, and Russ is his father, Reed's mine, they got to work there and help manage that farm. So we've had a history with the developmental center for probably 60 or 70 years. A lot of the ground that was given up for taxes in the Long Creek beds ended up being school trust property because the government took ownership of it because they defaulted on it and the price to purchase it was small and they couldn't get much revenue, so they kept a lot of that ground, and that's how some of it was acquired. But either way, I think we've done all we can to try and determine where this road should be. If people keep having babies and babies grow up and want houses, and we got to have roads. It's just the reality of life, and it does affect all of us as we get larger corridors next to us. I've been in the water business for 50 years now, and I always looked at roads as a utility corridor that we let them put asphalt on. So there is that element of building utilities that go along with it. And so all of those are important portions of what we do. But I want to say thank you to the people that have been mentioned, because all of them work very hard in behalf of trying to make this and move it along. We know it's been a slow process, but we are getting closer. There is light at the end of the tunnel, whether it's the sun or just a train coming through it, I don't know. But we certainly thank you for attending this evening, and we benefit from the input that we get. We make poor decisions when we don't hear from the public. I'll end with one joke that probably all of you have heard, but it's worth saying because it's apropos. A man that worked hard, was very fortunate, made a lot of money, and when he was getting close to dying, he was really concerned that he couldn't take any of the money with him. So he pleaded to deity and said, I've got to have some way to take some of my riches with me. And they said, we've had other requests. We'll let you have 2 large duffel bags you can carry and you can put whatever you want in it. When he got to his destination in heaven, they said, well, we'll have to check your bags. And he opened them. They were full of the best refined gold he could get his hands on. And they said, on the loudspeaker, another guy decided to bring pavement. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. And just one item of note, and you're all to be congratulated for this. I did a rough calculation on how many service hours our communities collectively put into the development center every year. It's clean up on Sundays and weekly activities. And it's over 16,000 hours a year that we've been doing for I don't know how many years, longer than I've lived here, which is 14. So you're all to be commended for that service. And thank you for being here.